Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony J. Algman. Data is everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. Today, my guest is Ryan Frederick. Ryan is a founder and product person at heart. He has helped companies grow from inception to viability through to sustainability. During the evolution of these companies, Ryan has served on company boards and been instrumental in capitalization activities. Ryan is an active angel investor, mentors, and advises entrepreneurs and startups, as well as corporate innovation leaders. He launched a nonprofit workforce development program to train underemployed adults on digital skills called Icy Stars. He's also an author and frequent speaker. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Anthony, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So why don't I gave you a little bio, but can you give our listeners a little bit more about your background and how you use data in doing what you do?
Yeah, as alluded to in the bio, I'm really a product person, at the end of the day, because when you start a company, you're doing that through a product or service that, solves a problem for people in a way that they care about. So I like building products. I like creating things. I'm a developer by training, and then moved over to the business side as part of starting companies. But I still really like building things. And so software is near and dear to my heart. And I always, I look at data and software sort of inexorably linked, because software is really plumbing for data. And when you think about it that way, it makes it a little bit more, both visual, and that you can sort of literally see, right, software now moving data around, right, to solve some problem and add some value. And then you can sort of look at data as water, right? And I think there's a lot of correlations between software being plumbing for data and data being water.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And at times I've taken a similar analogy to unreasonable extents. I often joke with my team. It's like at 4:00 in the afternoon when Anthony starts doing analogies on the fly, you never know what's going to happen. And some are just real bombs, and some of them actually work pretty well. But I think about, like, if we take the analogy of pipes, like in a house, and you think about like the plumbing and even software, we're talking about like the trades and connecting things and making core functionality happen. But the art behind it and how people take that and run with it from an architecture point of view, or from a artistic and just finishing point of view, that's where the business comes into its own. Like plumbing, you can't tell what the house looks like just by looking at the plumbing, but if that plumbing's broken, you're going to know some things about the house as a whole, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, where there's, a good corollary there is, in a plumbing water situation, right, where we mostly interact with plumbing and with water is at the points of consumption, right? On the front of our fridges, or when we need to get ice, from our fridge or from our faucets and our showers, et cetera. I think the same thing is true with data, except we lose focus on the consumption piece of data too often, because we get caught up in the actual piping, right, and the infrastructure and the tools of data. And then we lose sight of the consumption of the data, because there are still way too many bad reports, way too many convoluted dashboards, right, that never really drill down into saying, why do we need the data? What questions are we trying to answer with the data? And then how are we going to distribute and consume that data to those ends, right? So I think that very much like plumbing in a house, we sort of take the consumption piece for granted.
Well, yeah, it brings up a thought just in terms of like where, people lose their way sometimes on how that data should be used or what it's good for. And like, what are the appropriate use, the kind of fundamental components of data quality? Like, is this data suitable for what I want to do with it? And I think back, in my younger days, I worked at a country club. I was in high school, and at that country club, we had like a big outing. There was a corporate outing there, and my job was to make lemonade for all of the people there at the outing. Well, in my brilliance, I was creating there was like this packet of powder, and we dump it into a barrel and you fill it up with water. And I'm like, why am I going to drive all the way back to the main clubhouse to fill up the lemonade when I could get the water from our little stand out in the middle of the course, only to find out later, once I had done this and people started drinking the lemonade, that that actually was non-potable water that I had filled up the lemonade with. And nobody got sick or anything. We quickly adjusted it, but there was a data quality there. Taking our analogy to extremes, there was a data quality problem that I had in taking that water, just assuming, hey, I could do what I want with it. Here's water. It's coming out of a spigot. I can fill up this lemonade and have people drink it. Big mistake. And we see that with data constantly, is that people just get it out of the tap and assume they can do whatever they want with it. And that's just not always true.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, just like real water, data can become toxic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if water is allowed to sit, right, and it develops bacteria in the water, etc., it's not potable. You shouldn't drink it. You shouldn't consume it. The same is true with data, right? If data is old or if it's inappropriate to answer the question that you're trying to ask, etc., you could be relying on, you could be consuming toxic data that now is not going to serve your purpose and actually in the end might do more harm than good. So yeah, I think that's another corollary between, our, working analogy of, data and water, being very close cousins.
Right. And so and knowing your background is really around creating software and products and being a founder. And we want to spend most of our time today talking more about that. And thinking about how it connects to and uses the data and relies on some of these fundamentals that we've just been chatting about. I would like to understand, from your perspective, like we think, I think that the listening audience here probably has some understanding. We've talked about this in previous episodes around, how do you make data suitable for use, and how do you go through some of that, and there's definitely more to talk about there, but that's not for today. What I want to understand is when you're creating a product and you recognize that, hey, you're sourcing data through it, you're using it to create applications and a user experience and provide some sort of value to the folks that are going to use that software. How do you do that? Like, you see so many just bad software out there and bad products, and I think we can all just immediately off the top of our head think about, oh, this thing like that I've had to use or I encountered, like, how do they even make something so bad? But it's not easy. So why, in your mind, why is creating successful products so hard? Why is this so difficult to do well?
Yeah, I think there's three things that you contribute to software products being bad, built that are bad and largely unsuccessful. The first one is a lack of problem understanding.
Mm.
I don't think that you can build a successful, valuable product unless you understand the problem that you're trying to solve with that piece of software at an expert level.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, what an expert level means is that you have to understand the problem better than your customers and your users do.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, how are you going to expect to communicate the value of the product, right? Vis-a-vis the problem, if you don't understand the problem at least as well as they do, if not better.
Right.
I think another thing is that we often do validation in the wrong way around understanding the problem and then our potential product against the problem. Most user validation happens in the positive, and it's questions like, tell me what you like about us, tell me how this is going to be valuable for you, tell me how you're going to use it, tell me how this is going to change your life or your process or your job. When validation really should be positioned in the negative. We should ask things like, tell me why this won't add value for you, tell me why you won't use it, tell me why this won't solve your problem, because then you get real honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Too many products these days are still built on false positives because the validation around the problem and the product was done leaning too far toward the positive and not enough toward the negative.
Right.
And then we don't. And then the third thing is, and this is just because it's messy and humans are complicated, we don't spend enough time iterating with users intimately enough on the first versions of the product, because we don't want them to tell us that what we built was wrong or bad or we approached it improperly, right? So we might start out talking to users, but it's amazing to me how quickly as product builders we drift away from our users. And the moment that we feel like we can, we will.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, how illogical is that? Because it's like, I mean, and I get it's human nature to like just want that confirmation bias of like, tell me it's good, but it's like just try not to look at some of the hard truths of where it may not have been created as well. But you think about it, it's like I always want to know that as early as possible. I always want to make those adjustments as soon as I possibly can because I know 6 months from now it's going to be way more costly to learn it the hard way when either nobody buys it or the reviews are terrible. And in this world of, we claim to be data driven and we claim to like, have a richness of like reviews and stuff out there. But for the most part, what I see now, we have our 5-star review system, whereas 5 stars is, we like it. 4 stars is it's awful and it's, never should be used for anything. 3 stars is now you're trying to prove a point to somebody. 2 stars is now you're just disgruntled and trying to bring somebody's rating down. And 1 is just you're crazy. So like that, it's like it has become so skewed. It's either 5 stars or nothing, that getting it and interpreting feedback is a difficult process as well because of some of these things. At least in my opinion, that's what I've seen in a lot of these rating systems. It's either 5 stars or nothing. Does that cause problems? Like as you're trying to get feedback from folks, like do you see more variance because there's still a person out there who's like 3 is great, like it's definitely a good thing? Like does anybody even do that anymore?
Oh yeah, no doubt. And if anything, they've become even bigger crutches, right? And which is somewhat dangerous. Net promoter score now is a huge crutch for companies around, well, how well are we liked and how likely is someone to do business with us again? The problem with net promoter score now is though is that it's been bastardized so that no company even sends a net promoter score email to a customer who's already complained. They only send the net promoter score emails to the companies that they believe, based upon their analytics and their data, that has had a good experience is going to give them a 10. Well, so if you do that, you've completely bastardized the whole process, right? And the purity of it is all gone.
Yeah.
So and we also just tend to want to believe what we want to believe, right? And we ignore the things that don't agree with our hypothesis, right? And so that's one of the real challenges, not only building products but in data, is that too often now, when the data doesn't agree or user validation doesn't agree with what we need it to say for us to move forward and for us to feel good about what we're doing and the progress we've made, then we just change the data, or we just change the feedback to meet our own narrative.
Yeah, well, and when there's so much data available, you can pretty easily do that. I think back to my MBA studies many years ago, and I think there was a joke where it's like with enough analysis, any idea sounds bad. And it's something that I've always taken to heart because you can always find a reason not to do something, and yet the founders, the most successful among us, somehow break through that. So you get these anecdotal stories and it just reinforces this notion of, well, just ignore the data then, because some way you're going to find this negative and you should do it anyway. Like that's the kind of stuff that we start to put front and center, and we realize, oh, now data has started to navigate into some weird, pseudo place where being data driven is not even real anymore. So
yeah, most things don't work, right?
Mm.
Most new products don't work and aren't successful. Most new companies don't work and aren't successful. So it's irrational to build a new product and to start a new company because most of them aren't going to work. So you're pushing a boulder up a mountain, right? Even by thinking that your thing is going to be different and your thing is going to work. With that said, we still need people to take those risks and to take on those challenges, because the ones that do succeed often end up changing society. They change the way that business happens. They change, they improve our lives, right? And so it's worth that. And at the beginning, you have to pursue it sort of in the face of all rationality and all things that seem to make sense. There is a tipping point that you get to then, right, when you realize, oh my goodness, we actually might be onto something here, and this actually might work. And there's a sort of threshold that you cross from this early validation of, geez, we have no idea if this is going to work or not, to then getting enough signals that it could work, where now you even change your thinking around it from, we're in this sort of experimentation mode, to now shifting into this sort of strategic execution mode. Because when you're in experimentation mode at the beginning, it's like, we don't know if this is going to work. We're just, we have a theory, and then when it evolves from theory to actually being sort of practically viable, now you've got to quickly shift gears from being in experimentation mode to now being in execution mode.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips for people on recognizing when that transition point happens? Because where I want to take this next is when to decide it's not worth pursuing. So how do you evaluate that you're at this point, this decision point of whether to really double down and start to, grow that, or to say, you know what, nice try, but this idea is just not a winner and the opportunity cost is too high.
Yeah, the in the startup venture space, right? It's the elusive traction, right? Which is the roll up of, are you signing up customers? Are you signing up customers cost effectively? Are you retaining them? Right, et cetera. And at what velocity is that happening?
Yeah.
And I think that the challenge for many is that they either aren't signing up that many customers, or they're signing them up so sporadically that there's no evidence, right, that there's any sort of engine, that if you put more fuel in the engine, that it could go faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of sputtering, right? And so I think there's got to be, in every startup with every product, there's got to be a point where you say, oh, and you can look back at the breadcrumb trail and say, okay, we had 10 customers, and then we had 30, and then we had 70, and now we've got 110. So we're seeing a pattern here, that if we figure out and we know why that pattern is happening and how we've acquired those customers and why we've kept them, right? And this all goes back to that fundamental point of, if you don't get and stay close to your customers, especially early, you're kind of screwed. Because the only way that you're going to know, right, what that customer acquisition history looks like, and then what the path forward looks like, is if you've stayed close to your customers. Yeah. Right. But that's really, and then the threshold varies company to company, depending on your product and the problem you're solving and the space that you're in. Mm-hmm. Some companies, when they acquire 100 customers, they now have enough validation to know they should be able to get to 1,000, and then they should be able to get to 10,000. Some other products and companies don't have that validation until they get to a couple thousand users, right? And so social media is a great example. If you build a social media product, you're not really relevant, and you don't really have a business model until you get to 1 million users. Yeah. Because your business model is probably going to be based upon advertising, and anything below that, the numbers really just don't work. So if you're a social media app and company, and you've got 1,500 users, on the surface that looks okay and that sounds okay. If that's the kind of product that you are, that's not nearly enough validation to now know you can go from experimentation mode to execution mode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then I think that the parallels between like product companies versus service companies and other things like that are much different. Like in a service company, you might need 10 customers, to a similar vein. It's like, you may know, hey, what we're doing here can scale, but service businesses are often scaling more linearly and don't have the same economics underneath them. But it is fascinating to think of, sales growth as a more relevant barometer of viability than any product specific evaluation. Like, just because your product's good doesn't mean your product's going to be successful. And that, I think, sales growth is a nice, it combines the cost and benefit of it to show viability in ways looking just at the product or buying into the hype of something just doesn't quite do without real dollars on the line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a given now that your product has to be good, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to succeed if you build a fundamentally poor product. With that said, there's lots of good products that have been built that have gone nowhere, because now distribution is just as important as the product. Because if you don't figure out the distribution piece, And a ticket into the game is you built a good product. The real differentiator is distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Can you figure out how to create visibility for your product, figure out what the pricing model is, how you're then going to convert customers, right, who've become aware and somehow now have tried your product, if you've got a demo or you've got some trial period or what have you, and then you've converted them and then you've retained them, because there's also freemium was a big thing a decade ago, and it's still and it's still out there, but freemium got sort of bastardized too, because it started out as really just being a pricing strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right, and a way to acquire customers. It then became a business model, and freemium is not a business model, because if you give away your product to too many people for free and it's too feature rich for what you give them for free, enough aren't going to convert to being pay customers, and then your business doesn't fundamentally work really. Evernote's a good example. I'm an Evernote premium subscriber because I like some of the premium features. But Evernote, if you looked at it and said, is it a successful product and company? The answer would have to be no, because they only convert like a little over 1% of their free users to pay users.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're and I think my premium subscription is something like $6 a month. That's not sustainable, right? If you're only converting 1% of your users. So, distribution, acquisition, and then monetization, if you can't get those things right on top of having built a good product, it's kind of irrelevant that you built a good product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Like Evernote, I don't think most listeners would immediately say Evernote's not a successful company. Everybody knows who Evernote is. They know what it does. They know the product. But from a business perspective, it is a business model that is not necessarily as successful as their name recognition would have one believe. And that's an interesting point, because at the end of the day, I mean, you found an organization, you found a company, a product, whatever type of organization, because you believe that you can, make money or achieve some goal, and maybe you love doing it, but typically you're looking to have some sort of monetarily driven success of some sort, or making some sort of social impact or something like that. But you've got to be relatively confident to take on that risk, even despite some of the things we talked about earlier about how most ideas fail and how most ideas probably aren't that good to begin with. Like, so there's a lot in your way. And I want to give a little bit of perspective from my vantage point. This is something that I haven't talked about much, because I am a founder. I founded a business that when I first started Acumen Data Leadership, I thought I was going to create a consulting firm. I'm like, we do this data leadership stuff. I have, this book, and I have these ideas that I think are unique in the marketplace. And I still think that there's some uniqueness to the way I approach certain things with data. However, what I learned about very quickly is that by doing and founding a data leadership company, I realized a couple things. One, I never get to do anything with data leadership because I'm too busy trying to create a company, and I'm too busy thinking about cash flows, and I'm too thinking about taxes and insurance and all of those things. So it's a big drain, but I'm like, but I can do this thing on my terms, and there's something to be said for that. And I agree. But I quickly realized, you know what? I don't want to create a big consulting firm. I just want to do consulting in the data leadership space. So I actually found my niche, kind of doing subcontracting, working with other bigger firms, and allowed me to focus. And this is where I realized, like, while I can be a founder, I don't think fundamentally I am a founder, because I saw the fact that I love to do the work. I love to be in data leadership, solving these problems. What I didn't love to do was all the other stuff that a founder has to do. And so I realized, hey, I just want to get back to work. So I ended up taking a real job again, because I learned that I didn't love all the things that were keeping me independent in the first place. So why not go and be in the fight, solving the problem, building a team, doing all this stuff day in and day out? So what I learned is that, yes, I could do it okay and could deal with those things, but didn't love it. So my question for you is, why do you love it? And what do you love about being a founder, working with other founders, and being in this space? And how would you help somebody who may be in a similar situation to what I was years ago, and thinking about going out on my own, to take stock in whether or not that's a good idea, or founding a company? How do you know if it's right for you?
Yeah, I think that it's a great point in line of conversation. I think being a founder and starting and having a company become commercially viable is the hardest professional thing that anybody can do, because you have to wear so many hats and there's so many plates spinning, and there is too much stuff to do and too little time, et cetera. So
Mhm.
you have to be ruthless in your prioritization about what you're going to spend your time on, right,
Yeah.
at any given moment, because everything matters. Everything just doesn't matter equally in this moment.
Right.
But I also think that starting a services firm like your consulting firm
Mm.
versus a product company are also very different existences. Because what often happens with, and I have a new book coming out around managing and growing a services firm.
Mm.
Um, what often happens when people start services firms is they're a craftsperson,
Mhm.
right? Like you were around data leadership.
Sure.
And then what happens is they then realize if they're going to continue to be a craftsperson, their services firm is going to be constrained, and it's only going to get so big, and they're still going to have to do a lot of the work.
Mhm.
Now, if what they're most excited about is the work and applying their craft, that's cool. If they have visions of the firm growing and getting bigger, then they have to make the transition, just like we talked about a product company transitioning from sort of experimentation mode to execution mode.
Mhm.
A founder of a services firm, if they want to grow the firm, they have to make the transition from craftsperson to business person,
Yeah.
which means 80% of the time, they're probably doing nothing related to the craft.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of it if you want to grow a services firm,
Yeah.
right? Because now you're going to hire other craftspeople to do the work. And then your focus is going to be on, well, how do I manage the business and how do I grow the business, et cetera. So I think people who start services firms in particular need to decide and need to be self-aware enough to ask themselves, do I want to be a craftsperson who just happens to have their own shop? Or do I want to own a very successful growing services firm, and I care more about that than I care about personally applying the craft?
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point. And just having been in that decision literally myself in my career, I think you put it very fairly and very accurately for someone. And I went through this journey the hard way, right? I thought I wanted to be a founder. I thought I check these boxes. I know I can do it. I have the risk profile. I'm willing to take these chances. I'm willing to make the investment and to do it. And I have the knowledge and background from studies and experience with small firms and things like that. I'm ready to do it. And I wouldn't let it go until I knew I could do it, but didn't want to do it. And that was after I evolved it to that kind of craftsperson firm, to where I'm like, well, if I want to do this craftsperson type of model, there's better ways to do that. Like there's better ways for me to achieve those goals in that context. But what it left me with was a place where I could do what I really wanted to do as a thought leader in the data leadership space, and do things like this podcast, like we were talking about prior to the show. It's like that to me was what turned out to be the most important thing, which I didn't think was the most important thing when I first started it out. When I first started it out, I thought, oh, I can create this business because this business needs to reach everyone. Well, I can reach everyone in ways that aren't just a business. And that's where I think, something like a podcast where you can do it as a labor of love, as opposed to a labor day in and day out for, trying to make your monthly expenses. It's a different mindset. And sometimes I think our best work comes when we're just passionate about what we're doing for the sake of doing it well and making a difference, versus creating that business. Because I was never willing to do that 80% of the time to just make the business function when I really wanted to be doing data leadership stuff. So I really appreciate your perspective on that, because it's it's something that I think a lot of consultants especially have this vision of, do I go independent? Do I want to do this stuff? And there's ways to take it where you're not trying to create a whole business around it. And, there is a place for independent work that doesn't have the same level of overhead. So what, knowing all the complexities, knowing some of the challenges and the likelihood of failure in all of it, why do you personally gravitate to it? Like, what is it about that journey and that challenge that exhilarates you?
Yeah, I think it is so multifaceted and multidimensional that it's kind of irreplaceable. Um, because you're just not going to find another professional scenario that's going to challenge you to the level of trying to start and make a company successful, as being, a founder. It's and so I think the challenge of it, and the sort of unknown factor as part of it, I think it has always been super intriguing to me, and it is to the clients that we have at AWH, and companies that, I'm on boards of and I advise, et cetera. That you can almost tell the founders who are at least going to have a shot at making it work versus those who probably aren't.
Mhm.
The founders who have a shot at making it work, um, are so interested in the mechanism of it working, and them figuring things out along the way, and they put their egos on the shelf, and they don't care how many accolades they get. They frankly don't even care how much money they make, right? As long as they can live, right?
Mhm.
They're not that money motivated, right? And so I think that if you can find founders that are consumed by the problem, and then who work in the best interest of the problem, and the best interest of their team, and in the best interest of customers, and who put themselves at the end of the interest line, those are founders, and those are companies that have a chance of making it. Founders that are super egotistical, and that are very self-driven, right? From not from a motivation perspective, but from a, hey, the spotlight's always got to be on me. That almost never ends and goes well, because they're sucking all of the energy out of all of the other things and areas that they should be putting ahead of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just keep thinking about consumed by the problem. I think that to me speaks volumes. Like you cannot expect to go and create a successful company of any kind if you're just doing it to try to make a dollar. You have to believe in what you're doing, and to the point of, in like such an intensity that nothing else will stand in your way, because that's what it takes. I mean, that has to be what it takes to rise above all of those challenges to get it done. You cannot, expect that you're going to put in a 40-hour work week and make dinner every night when you are, trying to do something that is this challenging. And you have to be driven in a way that for most people just dollars won't do.
Yeah, and if it is the dollars that you're after, those are going to come so far down the road
Mhm.
from where your current existence is, that it's so far in the distance that you won't keep going, and you won't have enough grit to keep going to see those dollars realize.
Mhm.
Because, what I say in the book, and what I say when I talk to founders directly, is you're going to go broke before you have any money and you make any money off of your company. And even if you raise investment, right, you're going to pay yourself a decent salary, but you're not going to get rich as the founder, until you have some sort of significant growth, or until you have some sort of exit, and you get acquired, et cetera. So anybody who does it for the money is just naive and misguided, because that's never a good enough reason, and it's also never going to pay off for you in the way that you think it's going to, because you're going to have to put in years of being underpaid and dealing with lots of things and lots of problems that you never had to expect to deal with, that you're going to be highly underpaid to deal with and to solve. Yet if you're consumed by the problem and adding value for people around the problem, that's what has to be enough to get you through it. Otherwise, it's the other things, the other sort of tangential things, are not going to be enough to see you through it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And two, it's I bet there's many founders who have made it through to get the dollars to find that the dollars didn't give them all the happiness they thought they were going to get from it. And at some point, the diminishing marginal returns of that, if you didn't achieve something through the work itself and the creation of that, that goes beyond monetary riches, then you're probably not going to find that is will have been worth all that effort for all those years, like to your point, where you've been grossly underpaid.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that I think a lot of people believe that, when a founder has a company that succeeds and does become wealthy, that somehow they just want to get to a point where now they just want to walk away and they just want to like manage their money.
Mhm.
That's almost never the case, because it was never about the money. And
Mhm.
even if they become wealthy, they're not satisfied or they're not fulfilled now just managing their money, right?
Yeah.
That's why they become angel investors, and that's why they get on company boards, and that's why they get on nonprofit boards, or they start foundations, right? Because it was never about the money, and even when they have it's not then about the money either, right? They have to stay in the game, right? and
Yeah.
and I think people have a little bit of a misnomer that somebody who accomplishes wealth is doing it just so they can sort of kick back and manage their money. Most people don't. Most people, that's true, now they have to manage their money, but most people then look for other opportunities to stay in the game,
Mhm.
not just sit back and manage their money.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes good sense. It also highlights a risk too of when you do make it and you've gone public, for example, and you may very well lose control of that thing that you have been putting everything into for so long. At what cost does that come sometimes? I know there's a lot of folks out there that regret having sold out because they couldn't find that next thing to keep them in the game.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, if you're a company that takes investment capital, you are going to give up some equity, and you are likely going to end up not having control over the fate of the company that you started.
Mhm.
And that's hard for some founders, but there's also lots of founders who start companies and they get them through that experimentation phase, and then when the company needs to go into the execution phase, sometimes the board of that company then looks at that founder and says, you don't have the right skills to
Yeah.
take this company to the next level. And the founder finds themselves on the outside of the company that they started looking in. And is it bad? I don't know that it's bad, because I think if that's what the company truly needed to continue to grow and succeed, then the board has an obligation to work in the best interest of the company,
Mhm.
not in the best interest of the people that started the company.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately, in a lot of those cases too, politics and egos and personalities also get involved. Not surprisingly,
Mhm.
there's still flawed humans involved. But I think that it's founders shouldn't be surprised if their company has some level of success, that they then might be asked to take on a different role. They may lose majority ownership and equity of the company, and their role moving forward is definitely going to evolve, and it may diminish. And at some point, they may no longer be part of the company that they started. And if a founder whose company is starting to have some success isn't aware of these things and isn't mindful of these things, those things can be very shocking
Mhm.
when they happen. But that's a founder who just wasn't aware of the process of how companies grow and how companies get capitalized,
Mhm.
frankly, as they grow.
Yeah, well, and there's so many dynamics that we could spend hours actually talking about that. But it is, to think about the life cycle and the skills necessary to take companies through different stages, and why it's important to be able to do so effectively, and to remember, there was a reason you created this company in the first place, and to have achieved much of that and realized that for broad adoption and full scale of its full potential, you need different skill sets at that helm. And oftentimes I've heard from a lot of founders that they really don't want that operational side. They don't want to manage that business anyway, because it's become something that has lost some of its luster of that journey from the early days. I've heard so many people that have been involved for organizations for a couple decades, and they always look back to those crazy lean years when it was such an adventure, and they miss that because now the dynamics are much more muted.
Yeah, and that just reinforces, and I agree with you, and that just reinforces that the period of time that should be the worst as part of starting a company in people's memories, right? When they were sleeping at the office and when they were trying to figure out how they were going to make payroll in the next week and how they were going to figure out how they were going to make rent while also figuring out how they were going to spend money on marketing, right, and hire a salesperson and all these things. Those are the best times. Those are the times that every founder remembers fondly, and they almost want to go back and recreate those times, because if you get to the point, if you're fortunate enough to get to the point where now a company is becoming managed and you've got professional managers involved, that's a very different culture. That's a very different type of company than in the lean years when you're just trying to make it through the day to show up tomorrow to see what you need to do tomorrow, to show up the day after that, right?
Yeah.
But that's what everybody talks so fondly, right? Because it's it's that thrill, and it's that sort of energy, rush of, we don't know if this thing is going to work, but my goodness, we got to show up one more day to try to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's inspiring to think about those days and being in that, and anybody who's had that experience, even for a short period of time, can relate to that and understand, even though it feels paradoxical when you talk about it, it's so true that sometimes what are seemingly objectively the worst of times are actually the most precious times in the growth of that organization. So it's really interesting. While we still have a couple minutes, I would love to hear a little bit more about Icy Stars and what precipitated creating that organization, if you would.
Yeah, so Icy Stars is a workforce development program, headquartered in Chicago, that's been around for 21 years now. And I'm in Columbus,
Mm.
and I came across the program probably 6 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I loved it. And they were only operating in Chicago at the time.
Mm.
And so I got to know the program, and then we brought it to Columbus, and launched it in Columbus as the first expansion location outside of Chicago. And we essentially train underemployed adults in digital skills. So they learn how to write code, they learn how to become project managers, they learn how to become software testers, etc. And it's confirmed for me that skills training is the great equalizer and democratizer.
Mhm.
If you have monetizable skills, then your life trajectory is very different than if you don't have any skills that you can monetize commercially. And it also levels the playing field. So we have a heavy focus on minorities. We have a heavy focus on women, on veterans, and people that are maybe not dealt the same hand, that some people are dealt, and they need some access. And so, we're very intentional on making sure that we're training a diverse group of people, and that we're giving them the access and awareness that they need to try to fulfill their potential. And so it's just been a super fun thing to be a part of. And I think that we need to do more, frankly, because I think that we have a huge gap now, economically and societally, that and I used to say that it was between those that went to college and those that didn't go to college, and we still need vocational skills training for those that don't go to college.
Mhm.
Now I'm not sure that the college part even needs to be exclusionary, because there's lots of people graduating with degrees from college that they can't monetize those degrees. They're underemployed, and they've got huge debt.
Yeah.
So we need non-traditional skills training and educational pathways that allow many more people to be able to succeed professionally and to sort of fulfill their potential than we currently have right now.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I appreciate you taking the time and spending that effort on helping to create that and connect to those folks that need those skills and may not have other avenues to get them. And so I think it's a great service that you provide. I've been aware of the organization in Chicago for some time, so it's great to see that expanding. So Ryan, we're out of time, so I want to thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you coming in and sharing your wisdom with us on the show.
Anthony, enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. And thank you for watching or listening today. You'll find links and more information about today's topic in the show notes. Subscribe to our show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Visit Algman.com to learn more about Algman data leadership and the many ways we can help you become a data leader. Stay safe during these unusual times and go make an impact.